Hey, friends, welcome back to Shift Happens. My name is Joe Smith. I'm your host and the lead pastor of an open affirming church here in Gainesville, Florida called Shift. And with me today is somebody that I just recently got connected with. I had the distinct privilege of going to a conference that was put on by a new organization called the Post Evangelical Collective, and they quickly are near and dear to my heart. And there were people from all over the country, and you start going to these breakout sessions and you start seeing familiar faces. And I met this person at like almost every breakout session. It just kind of like, oh, hey, you're here too, and oh, you're here too, and then just kind of met. And with me is Billie Hoard.
Hi.
And Billie, thank you for taking time out of your evening to come and talk with us.
Thank you for inviting me. This is really exciting. And it was really funny. It was sort of that like, who am I going to see? Okay, okay, okay. Oh my gosh, this is the same people. It was really great. You were at like every single one. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty close. It was pretty close to like
Yeah.
almost every single one. I think the only breakout session that we may not have been a part of is that original. I went to like the pre-conference thing, and
Okay.
it was at Tom Ord
Oh yeah,
um
okay.
did it, but
Yeah, I
I don't
didn't
even
go
know
there.
if that counts as a breakout.
It's
So
true. It was pre-conference. We're not going to count it. That
it
was,
was,
you're
yeah, it
right.
was pre-conference. So then I guess we did then. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
we did.
I think so. I
Yeah,
think
I
you're
think we
right.
did. And I asked Billie to come on. I didn't we didn't know each other. I didn't know you at all. I think I had seen some of your reels, how they kind of pop up.
Yeah.
But obviously I didn't know who you were. And then having a chance to just hear you speak and kind of share a little bit in those breakouts, and then we connected on social media, and I was like, holy cow, this person is just out there, like living and then giving other people permission. And so I'm super excited to dive into this and learn more about you. So tell us, what was life like for little Billie? Where did little Billie grow up, and was church part of
Yeah.
that? And what was all that like?
I'm a church Christian church kid from like way back. My parents were, just old school evangelical. I was born in the early 80s. Um, so going way, way back, I've been in that scene. I was born in South Carolina.
Mm,
My family moved to Turkey, Ankara,
mm,
Turkey, when I was 7. And so I grew up overseas, came back for college basically, so around 18. I lived there it was about 10 years, kind of around it. Um, and I came back and I went to Bible college in South Carolina.
did
Did 4 years of that. Yo, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, was Turkey missions?
Yeah, I was trying to gloss that one a little bit. Technically, while I was there, it was not. Dad had. I'm not gonna tell the whole story just because it's a big long story.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
the short version is that like we were heavily involved with the church. My parents were there because they thought God wanted them to be there. But and also my dad was part of a joint venture company, and we moved there. Like we had the opportunity to move there because of that company. So dad
Gotcha.
was employed with a joint venture company. While he was there, he helped start the first Protestant church in Ankara in like 200 years or something like that. But yeah,
So kinda, but not really. Like
yeah, kind of.
there's a
But like, I
job,
don't.
but
I feel like it's stolen valor to claim like full on missionary kid like status. I had friends; those were all my friends growing up. But I don't want to, like,
uh-huh.
you know, we were being flown back to the States every year for like R&R, and that's not quite a luxury that most MKs get. So
That's funny. Stolen valor. That's true though. No, I feel that.
yeah,
But the reality also is that if you grew up in like evangelical church, especially in like the 80s and 90s, everything was mission. Like
yeah,
everything was mission. So
no, absolutely.
the fact that they went over there for this job, but then also planted a church is pretty par for course.
Oh yeah, no, like the way they tell the story, I was very much like there was a missions, conference at our church, and the speakers sort of had that like everybody should be involved in missions in some way, and you need to know what it is. And so they took some time to like pray and discern about that. And then like the next weekend, Dad got offered this job transfer if he wanted it, and they kind of took that as a sign from God that like
Divine providence.
that's their role in missions, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
very
you're
much.
you're growing up over there, and then you go to Bible college,
Yeah.
and let's dive into that some.
Yeah. At some point, I should probably mention for your audience, like I am a trans woman, so like I know the voice is a thing and it can be a little bit hard to track. So on that one, and like that becomes quite relevant to the story at some point,
I'm
at
sure it
some point
does.
along the way. I was not out yet when I went to Bible college, and I wasn't out to myself yet, so it was not like I know that a lot of my queer friends have this experience of like I had this like sense of growing queerness in myself, and I went to Bible college to stop it. I didn't quite have that experience. We could get into the whole like being trans, what was that like,
Yep.
but that wasn't what I was doing when I went to Bible college. I just had this sense that like that was what a good Christian kid should do.
Hmm.
I think I originally planned to get, they had the school I went to, Columbia International University, has a 1 year Bible degree certificate you can do. And I planned to do that and then go on to a regular 4 year college. And then when I was there, I made friends and I sort of, I decided I had a calling from God that I should finish. And today, of how I would feel about saying there was a calling from God, but I met my wife while I was there. And so I'm happy about that part. um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I graduated with a degree in Bible and Humanities from the Deep South. I was just telling somebody that I was just talking to someone, I think probably on social media, about the fact that like I feel like sometimes like conservatives, especially sort of paleo conservatives, they have this whole like classic Christian education thing they want you to do. And I have that education. Like I went to like a tiny, like I was homeschooled, and then I went to like a tiny little Christian school, and I went to a private school, and then I went to a very conservative Bible college. Like the only thing that kept them from being fundamentalists was that they were in the same state as Bob Jones University, and they weren't quite that conservative.
Mm.
So like, but they were like the next notch up from Bob Jones, right? And then I went to I moved to Maryland and I got a master's in the liberal arts, like studying the Western canon from St. John's. Like I have exactly the education that conservatives want you to have, and I'm like an anarcho-pacifist, leftist, transgender lesbian, right? Like I'm what they say kids are not supposed to be. And I don't think they actually want people to get the education that I got. Like when I was in Bible college, sorry, back to full circle here. But when I was in Bible college, like they taught me how to read the Bible and how to love the Bible, and I did and I do. And that led me to start asking questions that they weren't ready to answer.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, sometimes I feel like what they actually want are people who can hold up a degree or some certificate and say they're experts, but don't actually read that carefully and just trust them for what it means and what it says. Like they don't actually want people to read and engage with their texts.
Yeah.
Sorry, side rant
No,
there.
I resonate with that. I have long since felt like there's this permission to quote unquote, if you're just listening to this, I got air quotes, like wrestle
Hmm.
with things as long as you
Hmm.
still come to the same conclusion. Sure, ask and wrestle all you want, but here's the answer.
Right?
And you can come at it from this way or you can come at it from this way, but as long as you're still coming here,
It
yeah.
was it was so confusing to me. And I think I don't know if it's Turkey, like having just been overseas and sort of somewhat isolated from like developing 90s evangelical megaculture, but also somewhat tied into it, or if it's just my personality, I don't know. But I remember going to Bible college and being very excited that I was finally going to meet the people who could answer all my questions. And I really
Mm,
believed it, like naively, but genuinely believed that I was going to like the place where they had the answers for all these like early you're an 18-year-old but like theodicy questions that you're starting to ask, and these other questions where you're seeing contradictions or apparent contradictions in the Bible, and you're like, how do we fix this? And I kind of made a pill out of myself, it turns out. Like my wife will tell me she thought that like she thought I was the asshole freshman year, because I would ask the professors these questions and not be satisfied with their answers, and people thought I was trying to make the professors look bad, and I was not. I genuinely thought they had the answers and I was failing to understand them. So I kept like pushing the question forward. I was like, well, I paid for this tuition and I need to keep asking questions until I get your answer. And apparently most of the people in the class would be like, we get it. You're making this poor professor. They don't want to admit they don't know what they're saying, but they don't know what they're saying. Um, because that's what they
well,
told us was going to happen, right? Like they would tell us, like you ever, I mean, you grow up in the church and ask the elder the question. You ask your parents, and they're like, oh, you should ask this person who like has a Bible college degree or whatever, right? And then they kind of keep pushing, like they're excited about your questions at first, but if they can't answer them to your satisfaction, they end up like pushing you off to like a higher sort of source for the answers. And so eventually you're at Bible college, and these are like the people with the doctorate in Greek and so forth. And and they're supposed to have the answers. And finding out, it took me, to my shame, embarrassment, it took me probably 2 years to figure out that like they just didn't have those answers, and that kind of revolutionized my world.
Yeah,
That I was
that
like, oh,
that kind of
well,
rocks a little bit if you're going into like that. But I had the same kind of experience
mm,
of like, okay, well, these people, when I went to my Bible college, like they'll have all the answers. Um, I didn't have that same drive that you did, so I think I swallowed a bunch of stuff that I wish I wouldn't have. And but that's just my story. So you're at this Bible college.
yeah.
At what point? At what point in your story is it at Bible college? Do you begin to have like when does that shift start to take place internally of like, wait, I'm I am not I am not what the church is telling me I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
When does that start to? And you mentioned you met your wife at Bible college,
Yeah.
which I'm sure is just like all of us. Like I met my wife at Bible college.
Mhm.
Fortunately, we didn't feel the pressure
Yeah.
because there's a ton. It was there.
Yeah.
We just ignored it because we weren't ready. But um,
Oh
man,
yeah.
I'm curious about all of that.
Yeah. We got married about a year out of college. Yeah, that's, I mean, in terms of where did I start to feel like I'm not what I'm supposed to be for like this place and these people. It's sort of a two-step thing for me. I've been trying to figure out the best ways to tell this
Yeah.
story. It's a, I again, I'm trans. I always knew what felt like would be right for me. Like if you'd asked me when I was like 7, I would have said like, well, I wouldn't have told you I wanted to be a girl because it had been very made clear to me that that was a shameful thing that you should never ever say,
Yeah.
right? But I think if I'd been honest, I probably would have phrased it in some way like that, just because that was all the language I had for it. This kind of intense internal longing. Um, and hatred is not the right word for how I experienced the way I was, but it was a sense of like just wrongness, like
Mm.
a deep sense of wrongness with my body and with my way of the kind of way of being in the world that I felt like I was forced into just to kind of get along and to survive. And I got good at it. Um, when I did finally come out, there were only 2 people that had any suspicions ahead of time. Um, but I was saved is exactly the wrong word, but like all of the real angst of it was postponed, let's say, by purity culture, right? So I mean, I grew up, I
Mm.
was a teenager in the 90s. And if you were somebody who thought they were, or actually were, a boy in like 1998, 1999, purity culture had a very straightforward answer for everything that's wrong with you. And that was just that you're a total pervert, right? Like every single boy was a total perv. Like you're just a lustful nut job. Um, in 1998, like every
That's
single boy was,
true.
right?
Yes.
Like anybody who grew up around, like that was what purity culture did to people who were like, put in this boy category, this male category. And for me, what that did was it allowed me to take everything that was going on with my sexuality and with my gender, and just like cram it into this like, well, that's my weirdness, right? Like that's what my being a pervert, as all of us are, and that sort of protected a lot of my self-esteem, I think, because I was like, I know we all are. Like you sort of do that thing. I think a lot of guys and men coded people who grew up in the 90s in the church have the experience of like over the course of 4 years finding out that like all of their other friends also struggle with lust. I'm air quoting this, like struggle with lust. Like you kind of, it's like ones and twos. You start finding out that like everybody else also does the same basic sets of things. They didn't want to be women, as it turned out. A lot of
Yeah.
them did actually. But anyway, but like, but it's like that whole like, oh, I feel this way about, you'd have these kind of somewhat coded conversations with your friends, and you kind of figure out that like, okay, this is actually everybody. And so I just took all of my queerness and put it into that category and thought, well, we all struggle with that. And so like when I did come out to my wife, which is much later, we talked about, she said, sort of, why didn't you tell me earlier? And I said, I thought I had, like, I genuinely thought I had told her in all the language I knew. Like I had had the whole conversation that you're supposed to have when you're a senior and you're serious with a girl and you say, hey, I kind of struggle with every man's problem, or whatever the evangelical code for it was at the time. And I just thought I was being as specific as was decent, right? Like, you're just not
Mm.
supposed to get into more specifics, because that would be like crude or rude or like inappropriate, right? Like, I was like, I was as vulnerable with her as I knew how to be at the time. And that worked ish in terms of helping me continue to feel like I had a place. Like, I thought I understood my place within evangelicalism, all the way up until I became affirming. Till my theology changed, actually,
Mm.
was what changed. And once my theology had changed, it still took a while, because I was so this is, I mean, I graduated from Bible college in 2004. And then a couple years later, in 2007, we moved up to Maryland, and I started graduate school. And I think I shifted to sort of what we would call like affirming queer affirming theology in 2010 or
Mm.
so, somewhere between 2009 and 2010. There were 2 years where I had my master's, but I couldn't find a job, and I was parking cars and teaching philosophy at a community college as an adjunct professor, and reading everything I could get my hands on. And that was when I was really doing, like, just really asking all my questions. And that's when I shifted to affirming theology. And it still took me another like 5 years to figure out, oh, this is me. And I always say that the reason is because of like momentum, right? Like,
Mm.
I you just don't think to apply it to you. Like, I had an entire life's worth of experience of taking that thing and locking it away and not looking at it, and keeping it as my private, like, that's my problem, that's my temptation, that's my sin. And so you don't look at it too closely. You just keep batting it down and pushing it away. Um, until eventually what happened I'm a public high school teacher now. And I ended up starting 6 months after I became affirming. I ended up starting our school's Gender and Sexuality Alliance. We called it the Gay Straight Alliance at the
Yep.
time.
GSA. Yeah.
Yeah, our GSA. And I was the GSA coordinator, not because I was particularly well suited for it. I had only been affirming for 6 months, or something, but because nobody else was doing it. And I had read an article that those really help to decrease bullying in queer youth. And I thought that was probably important, and that would be a good way to help out. And I really liked the queer kids in my classes. So I started doing that, and knowing that, like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about queer stuff. I just read everything I could, because that's the kind of person I am. And so I learned about transness and trans people and the varieties of transness. I learned and deconstructed some of the lies that I had read when I was a teenager, and first kind of looking at, like, can men become women? um, and I'd read some really bad misinformation back then, and I deconstructed it. I learned sort of a lot more accurate models for transness. And then one day somebody challenged me, saying, straight people have trouble being good allies. And I was like, a little offended. I still thought of myself as a straight man. And as soon as I had that sense of, like, I'm a little bit offended by this, there's like the little voice in my head that goes, yeah, but there's that thing. And I was like, well, we don't look at that thing. And then I helped a friend move, and he just kept bugging at me bugging me while I was helping him with loading the truck and all that. And I got home and I took a shower, and I was in the shower, and I said, okay, fine. Let me just ask the questions that, like, I know that if I answer this way, that does mean I'm trans. Like, I know enough about it now that it would mean I was trans if I answer this way. And surely that won't be the answer, but I'm gonna ask the question honestly. And you sort of actually I went through the actual process of, like, asking myself this question and realizing that the answer actually was that. That, like, no, you're trans, girl. And I mean, it devastated me in not in, like, in some ways I was elated. Like, it was one of the happier moments of my life. It was also the most terrifying moments of my life. Because suddenly everything made sense. And also suddenly, well, that's a whole lot to have to deal with, right? Like, that's a lot of, like, implications for your life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that for so in a lot of ways, I mean, I count myself very, very lucky on a lot of fronts. Like, I mean, a lot of trans people that, like, transition a little bit later on in life, kind of post early 20s, sometimes have some regrets around it. And I do have some regrets, I think, that I carry around about, like, not figuring it out early. At the same time, I like the life I led overall. Most of the time I was not miserable. It was a kind of thing that I was pushing to the back and trying to ignore and, like, repressing. And it started to get worse. It is true what they say, that you can only ignore it for so long, and it keeps coming back stronger and harder and more painfully. And but in that time, um, I shifted from, non-affirming to affirming theology. Like by the time I figured out who I was, that was not a theological problem for me anymore, right? That was not a spiritual problem for me. In
Right.
fact, I often say that Jesus was the first person to call me daughter. I spent a lot of time in the vineyard. We were charismatic, and I did a lot of imaginative prayer. And it's not like, I'm not speaking figuratively, right? Like it was literally while praying and talking to Jesus about it. The whole sense of I had from Jesus was just, I'm so glad you figured this out. Like this is so good. And then from there on out, I've never experienced Jesus without him calling me daughter, without him calling me Billy, without him using my name. Um, and that's its own whole story. So yeah, but so in a lot of ways that made the landing more gentle for me, right? Like when I did realize it, I was in a place in life where I am able to transition. I'm relatively privileged in that I live in a blue state that has a lot of trans-friendly laws. I am at a church. We were already a church that is fully affirming. When I came out to our church before I came out publicly and online, to the warmest possible reception. Um, my, my family was already affirming. We were already attending this affirming. Um, so I, in a lot of ways, knowingly or unknowingly, very much had prepared the ground for the time when I would realize what was happening with me.
Hmm. Well, can I ask again? I said
Yeah,
this before. If I ask something and you don't want to talk about it, you can tell me jump off a cliff. Just tell me.
totally fair.
But I'm thinking, that is not only is that just such a overwhelming realization for you,
Hmm.
but then also when you go to your wife and you're married, I still see the
Yeah.
ring. And
Yeah.
so what was that journey like?
Yeah, I was so afraid to tell her that I didn't for 3.5 years, and I spiraled into an intense, um, I don't know what this official psychological term would be for it. My therapist hasn't named it at me. I was angry for a year straight. I had taught myself to turn all of my negative emotions into anger because you can do something with anger, and so it feels like you're releasing it. Um, and this started sort of 2019. I remember the summer of 2020, which was a summer.
It was.
Right, it was a hell of a summer.
Yeah, it was.
I'm like out protesting and doing all this stuff and finding ways to like take out and get online and like fight with bigots. And I would actually specifically intentionally seek out people that I thought like I could legitimately vent my anger at, because I knew I had to vent my anger because I was so angry and I couldn't experience sadness anymore. By the time we got to like August of 2020, I realized I'd been angry almost without stop for a year.
Mm,
And I said, I gotta see a therapist about this. And I'd had this thought. So I came out to myself, I realized what was going on. And, and I decided I'm just going to know this. There's nothing wrong with being trans. It's a beautiful and wonderful way of being in the world, but I'm never going to be able to transition because I don't want to risk what that could mean for my family. I don't want to risk losing my wife. I don't want to risk breaking the family, that kind of a thing. So I held it for 3 years, and 3.5 years, until it was bad. In August, I decided I was going to see a therapist. Took me time to get there, wait lists and all the rest of that. But
mm,
I eventually I had the foresight to I wanted a therapist. I wanted to deal with this anger problem, but I knew enough to get a therapist who knew how to deal with gender issues, because I thought, that's probably going to come up, and I
mm,
don't want somebody who's going to be caught flat-footed by that. So, I did the intake, and it has to have been a weird one because she said, "What do you hear about?" I was like, "I'm here about the fact that I've been angry for a year and a half almost now. And like, I'm starting to lose the ability to even feel positive emotions, and I'm constantly checking out." Um, like I said, I've always been a big reader. At that point, it was all like podcasts and audiobooks. If I couldn't be physically reading, like I was constantly distracting myself from being present and in my body.
mm.
So I said, I've got all these anger problems. I haven't lost my temper or like flared up at anybody, but like this, I know I'm not healthy, right? And I said, "Oh, and by the way, I'm also a trans woman, and I'm not out about that." And she sort of said, okay. And I said, but I don't want to do anything about that. I think maybe it's like politics and like the isolation from like the lockdown for because of COVID.
Mm.
Um, can we deal with that? And I'm hoping that that'll like clear up enough emotional space that I can like go back to being a functional operating person again. And then she said, sure, we can try that. And so we did. We processed those things and processed them effectively, and it didn't help. And and actually then that was around that time that I started having a kind of weird form of panic attack where I would just shake. I couldn't cry anymore. I hadn't cried in a year. I would tell people would ask me how I was doing, and I would laugh and say, I am doing terribly. Like I'm really struggling right now. But I would say it in this way that like even my best friends, I don't know if they didn't know how to react or if they genuinely just kind of thought I was joking or like clearly had it together enough that I was like taking whatever steps were needed, right? So I didn't come across as sincere. I couldn't communicate how miserable I was. And so yeah, I would when I was alone, I would often just end up sort of laying down and shaking because I there's sort of nothing to do with all of this sadness and anger.
Mm.
And eventually you get to March and Lent started, and I decided to take Lent to pray and decide what I was going to do about this. I was starting to tell that this is untenable. Like I'd be in therapy and we just go in circles. What are you feeling? I need you to feel what you're feeling. When I'm feeling sadness. What are you feeling sadness over? The fact that I can't be a woman. I can't live as a woman in the world. Um, okay. I'm glad that you felt that. What do you want to do anything about it? No, I don't want to do anything about that. Okay, you don't have to do anything about that. I need you to try to like experience your emotions though, because like you're gonna it's very bad if you don't experience your emotions. So we would just go in circles. It was just okay, I'm experiencing my emotions. They are emotions. They are sadness and anger, and it's horrible. And so I prayed about it over Lent. And I remember asking God to just tell me what to do. I said, tell me it's sinful to not come out, that I'm like living a lie and that that's not honest. And I need to be who you've made me to be. Like I am a trans woman and I'm not telling the world about that. And and maybe tell me that's a lie, or tell me that like I've been wrong in being affirming and like I need to just own it, suck it up, and like, or tell me that like it's okay to be a trans woman, but I have a responsibility to my family to not cause that kind of disruption. And so I need to suck it up and just give me your marching orders.
Hmm.
And God wouldn't do it. I could not get, I met with a spiritual director. I could not get any, that was a very frustrating thing for him, I'm sure, because I had to be vague. I couldn't tell him. I didn't want to tell him, I didn't want to come out to him before I came out to Ashley if I was, and I was definitely considering coming out to my wife at that point. Um, and so, I'm praying about it and praying about it and praying about it. It was sort of my Lenten practice that year. And I eventually just had a very strong sense of God saying, no, any of those options, like what you choose to do is not a sin thing. I will be here with you no matter what you're choosing to do. It is your choice to make. And so that wasn't helpful. I mean, it was helpful in long term. It was incredibly helpful.
Yeah,
Right.
but
Like
in the
I'm so
moment,
glad.
just
At the
tell me, do I
moment,
turn right or do I turn left?
and
Yeah,
God was like, no, you don't get to put that on me. Because
yeah.
I wanted to be able to like go to my wife and be like, God said I have to transition, right? Like I wanted to not have to carry that responsibility. And I so I was talking to my therapist about that. And I think she asked me the question. She said, well, I understand you want to be there for your family and you feel the need to hold your family together, and you're afraid that if you come out, that will destroy everything. And she said, are you sure that it will? I said, no, I just think it will. And it feels like too big a risk to take. Like I can't. And she said, well, will you be able to be there for your family if you don't? And I realized, no, I was going to become like I was barely present to them anymore
Mm.
mentally as it was. And I realized, no, that I will become somebody I don't want to be around my family if I don't do something about this. And that was what clarified it for me. And so about a week after Easter of 2021, Ash and I went out on a date and we came home and I told her.
Mm.
And she was great. Was not all sunshine and rainbows immediately. She she said, I mean, the first thing she said, okay, I mean, I believe you and you need to do what you need to do. Do you think you're going to need to transition? And, I had that split moment where I was like, I could just say, I don't know. And we'll decide that later. I put that off. And I was like, no, I know. that I'm going to want to transition. Like that's going to happen. So I said, yeah, I think so. And she said, okay. She said, I don't know if I can do this, but um, I'm also not saying I can't and I won't. But I need to know that you will not hold it against me if I decide that this isn't something I could do. And I said, yeah, that's fair. And it took her, I wish I'd written the dates down, but I think it was about 2 weeks before she came back and said, I want to try. I mean, I don't know what is going to happen yet, but I know that I want to try to make this work. And then that was another maybe a month after that that she said, I think we're going to be okay. And probably by that summer, she came back again and said, we're going to be fine. Like I mean, it was in the middle of that summer that we started marriage counseling for the express purpose of walking together through my transition. Right? It was um, we want to do this. We're committed to doing it. We want to do it as well as we can. And so we're going to get the help we need to be able to do that well. And I would absolutely recommend that to every married, just coming out trans person who can afford it, who can manage it.
Hmm.
Being a school teacher, you get good benefits. Um,
Wow, that's she must be,
she's phenomenal.
yeah,
I
that's
mean, and
awesome.
we're both very, very happy now. I mean, we're both really happy that it worked out the way it did.
Well, and I'm sure too that because she's part of the story before too, and seeing you
Hmm.
like the words you use, checking out and not being present and that,
Yeah,
constant angry and her probably like, what is going on
yeah,
and what's happening? And then um
yep,
I you all may have had those conversations, but my guess from just, the outside looking in, at some point in time, I would assume that some tumblers just kind of started to come together for her too, like, oh, yeah. Okay, some of these things are starting to make sense now and
yeah. Yeah,
huh.
we had a lot of those really great conversations where it was like, "Oh, was that this?" And and sometimes I'd be like, "Oh, I hadn't even thought. Yes, that was this, right?" Like she would see things from our past that I hadn't put together, and she'd ask me, and I'd realize, "Oh, yeah, that's what was happening there." Um, yeah, she would, and it was absolutely the case. Like we would for that whole year, we had a pattern where she'd say, "Hey, you have not been present to us. You haven't been present to your kids. You haven't been present to me." And when I would listen, I would say, "You're right. That is a huge problem. I will do something about that. I'm going to fix it." And I would stop listening to audiobooks and podcasts and just like checking out like that for about 2 weeks, and then the pain would just get to be too bad, and I would
Mhm.
start. I mean, it's like the story of an alcoholic, only it was just distraction. It was anything that would be a sufficient mental distraction.
Mm. How did the rest of your family take that? I mean, how old, you mentioned kids. How old are they?
My kids now are 14, 10, and 4. So the 4-year-old she's
Yeah.
never, I mean, she was around, but she
Yeah, yeah.
um, the 14-year-old was one of the two people who had a little bit of a suspicion. He was hilarious. He said, "I kind of thought maybe." The reasons he thought were I don't even remember all of them, but I remember thinking I didn't even know that was a tell. But they were to him, and so there you go. And the middle child, our 10-year-old, I think he struggled with it isn't quite the right word because he really didn't struggle with it. He was kind of okay, but he had the most like he'd come back and he'd have questions about it.
Mhm.
He'd ask me like about the future, that kind of a thing. But he's been pretty chill. They're all actually phenomenal now. And it's fun. They still call me dad or daddy, the littlest one. My oldest actually calls me his lady father. And we stuck with it. I I told him,
Oh, 14, such an
I know,
age.
right? 14-year-old. But yeah, I wear it with honor. With pride. He yeah, and we had a conversation about it, and I said right now I'm very comfortable still with that. Like it's what you've always called me. It describes, you know, I'm not trying to take away from fatherhood, but it does describe a kind of culturally shaped way of parenting that,
Hmm.
yeah, I still largely, not entirely probably, but largely embody in the way that, like, in the mode in which I parent them. And so it still sort of works for us. And when I talked to all of them, we talked about that choice, and that was what they were comfortable with. It was what I was comfortable with, and we said, and we can come back and revisit this if it becomes uncomfortable, right? I mean, if at some point we're at the mall and you shout, "Hey, Dad," and I say yes, and people look and it's weird, we can and you say, maybe we can revisit that, then that's fine. We absolutely can. It hasn't happened yet, but it's definitely like been on the table from the get-go. But they're great.
That's that's probably something maybe a lot of people don't think about, but um I think that was probably I don't know how, intentional you were with that, but to me, that seems like an incredibly wise move, not only in just giving that permission, but that probably just takes a lot of pressure, a lot of worry, especially at that age. It's such a difficult age anyway. And then, where, most 14-year-olds are literally just worried about fitting in,
Yeah.
and you giving them permission to say, okay, that's weird. I don't want to do that anymore. And not feel guilty or feel
Yeah.
shame about it, but just like that, I'm sure
Well,
that's going to, like, in the long, especially in the long term, they're going to look back on that and be like, yeah, I mean, that's really cool.
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah. No, my brother, who's one of my closest friends as well, but he's a psychologist, and he talks about the fact that, I mean, all relationships are in both directions. Like, a relationship is a thing that exists between us, right? And so the words we have for those relationships also exist between us, and it's something that if I
Mm,
needed to, and I've known, and I have trans friends that do need to, right? That it is very, very painful to them to use a word like father or dad, because it screams man at them. And I'm, for whatever combination of circumstances, able to hear it without having man screamed at me. I'm very comfortable with being a lady father. Um, but not everybody is. And so there are different ways to have those conversations depending on your circumstances. But it did really work well for me. And I did the same thing. I mean, Ashley and I did the same thing together in terms of, I mean, she does call me her wife, but in terms of, we sat down, and once we realized we were going to try this, that we were going to try to make this happen. Um, and we talked about, what did I want, but we also talked about, what is she ready for? What does she think she'll be ready for? And neither of us I don't like to say either of us had any kind of a veto to it. We both
mhm.
just compared notes. And I said, I think I'm really going to need, given how long we've waited, given how things have gone, I'd really like to have started by this time. I'd really like to start, you know, say hormones, right? Like, I would really like to start hormones 3 months earlier than that, but anywhere in that window I think will work for me. What is comfortable for you? And so she explained her priorities, and where she was with things, and how she thought processing would work for her. Um, and we tried to do that with sort of everything. So if there's something I wanted to do, I mean, we're married, we talk about it, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's not I sometimes I've seen and heard stories where, one person will just give their partner, they sort of feel so blessed to have the partner be willing to tolerate them, that they give them all the power. And they say, you
Mm,
make all the decisions. And I don't think that's exactly healthy. I mean, this isn't us, right? And other times I've heard people say, well, this is what I need, and I need to tell you what I need. And that can be healthy to say, like, these are my boundaries and these are my needs. But again, you don't want to, yeah, I don't want to be, I want to be in a relationship. I don't want to
yeah.
be in where I'm ordering or
Yeah.
declaring
Or
things.
alienate your partner.
Absolutely. So we try to make it a conversation, and as much as we can. And so if I have an urgent need and say, look, I just don't have a lot of space on this, I need this thing, she hears that, right? That's what being in a partnership means. So yeah, it's been good.
So that was, if that was, what'd you say, 21?
Yeah.
So
That was
that's
20.
been about 3 years now of
Hmm.
doing this, and and
Yeah.
and I imagine that you all have kind of figured out your new norm and the
Yeah.
new way forward, and
We found
kind
our
of
path.
kind of seems like flourishing in that. Yes.
We absolutely, I would, at this point, I would say we're very much flourishing. She is in the seminary. She is currently the associate pastor at our church. My kids are
Nice.
doing, like, are like in the school, and this is the sort of thing, right? Like, I don't want to take credit for her accomplishments. She's brilliant. I mean, she's a brilliant and just wonderful and loving woman. But like I wouldn't have had the space to support her in seminary while working prior to coming out. I wouldn't have had the
Mm,
emotional and mental space. I couldn't have been locked in, checked in, making dinner when I need to make dinner, picking kids up when like you know how when you just two-parent household, we need to shuffle the responsibilities. But like I was not there enough for her to be able to take the time to do something like pursuing
mm,
her master's. Um, back then. And now we are. Like when one person in a relationship gets healthier, the relationship gets healthier and both people can flourish more. Um,
mm, mm-hmm.
and
There,
it's not that there haven't been hard times. There
right,
have, and they've
right.
been eternal. Yeah.
It is curious to me that you said that, um, because I've been having several conversations lately about how evangelicalism teaches us a very disembodied faith,
Yeah.
a very disembodied way of living. You know, you divorce yourself from your thoughts, you divorce yourself from, like you said, we're all pervs, right? So like
Mhm.
the flesh is evil and
Oh
not
gosh.
not trusting, that internal voice, your gut instinct or whatever.
Yeah.
And that I'll never understand how people will continue to defend that, seeing the fruit of that tree, right? It's so
Yeah.
rotten.
It's so bad.
Um, Institutionally, it's rotten, but especially on an individual basis. But how you were able to be a better parent, a better partner
Yeah.
when you began to live in your whole self
Yeah.
into that healed humanity.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And this is where it's like my thing. Sorry, it's on my mind because I've been thinking about it. A year ago, exactly. I made it a habit to start posting on social media daily that queerness is a blessing.
I saw that. I've been seeing
You
that.
seen that?
Yeah.
You seen that
Yeah. I've
one?
saw those last few videos that you did
Yeah.
where, yeah.
That one has been an incredibly important process for me. Because I think we often get the message, and this is speaking to what you're talking about, right? That queerness, if you have, or this is what an evangelical would tell me and has told me, right? Like, queerness, if you happen to be queer, is actually like it's an unfortunate side effect of the fall. And if they're a nice evangelical, they'll tell you that like that's not your fault. It just happened to you randomly because the fall. If they're a mean evangelical, they'll tell you something stupid about your parents and
Yes.
then also tell you that it's your fault. But
And you're going to hell.
and you're going to hell. You're going to hell. So you need to just start feeling differently than you just do. Be different. Um, but both of those are telling me that my queerness is a problem and that I need to, ignore it, deny it, that other problems stem from it. And I don't, and if you're affirming, if you've moved on, you're out as you're trans, you're a lesbian, you're however you are, you're out as queer, you're ace, beautiful ace people. Um, there can be this tendency, like I think the world tells us to blame our queerness for any other problems in our lives because a lot of times those problems that come along say it's because you're queer that we're doing this to you, right? Like I got
Mm.
mobbed, I got internet mobbed by like libs of TikTok for being an
Oh,
out queer teacher. It was
yeah, they're fun.
terrible,
Yeah.
right?
Oh
Yeah,
my
yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, yeah. You know about these folks.
They did that to one of our school board members. So yeah.
Yeah.
It,
So the thing I went through, like I had to transfer schools in the end to get away. It was bad. And right. And so there's this narrative that plays that says, well, if you weren't queer, this wouldn't happen. Here's the thing. It's actually if the world were less unjust, if the world were more just, this wouldn't happen. Queerness is not the problem. Queer phobia is the problem. Injustice is the problem. And I needed to remind myself of that
mm,
on the regular because the thing is my queerness, and owning my queerness and recognizing my queerness and loving myself as a queer woman is what has made me healthy. Like it's night and day, the kind of life that like the flourishing, it was a good word, that like my family that I am able to have now in contrast to what I had when I was trying to pretend that my queerness was like my perversion and it was this curse that I had. It was this shameful thing that I had to pretend wasn't true. That was where I was not flourishing. My gosh. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
mm, huh. Yeah, I totally obviously I totally agree with what you're talking about. And it is strange how people, because you're not wrong, like the idea that like, well, if you weren't queer, this wouldn't happen to you. Um I, I Where does that work in any other place? Substitute the word queer for black. Well, if you weren't
Right.
black, this wouldn't happen to you. Okay, well that's like most of our history. Um,
Mhm.
but just that thought process, and I'm sure because you are so vocal on social media that you do catch
Oh, they don't like it.
quite a bit of heat.
I'll post. I mean, I was joking about it with somebody the other day. It's like if I can, especially Twitter, because Twitter is a dumpster fire.
Oh
But
my
like,
gosh.
I can post pretty much anything, and if it has a picture of me or any kind of reference to my queerness, and it could be like very side right, like referencing the existence of my wife, right? Or I mean, something very minuscule. Somebody, once it gets past about, it's the right now it's sitting where somewhere between 75 and 100 likes. Once I get past about 75 and 100 likes, somebody will jump on and just start yelling at me about like Romans 1 or something. And it's like they can't, it's like they can't help themselves. Like somebody's going to tell me I'm a man. If I post, if I say something like, had a great time at the zoo with my kids, they're amazing, love being a mom, which is what I'll often say in public, or I'll say lady father, actually, and yeah, before long, it's you're a man. That's not even relevant to what we were talking about, but you've got to know that you hate me for that. You got to let me know that you hate me for this.
Yeah,
It's,
there is a need, isn't there? I mean,
Mhm.
there is a deep-seated need for some reason to be like, no, this is wrong. I don't agree with you. You're wrong. Click.
No, so actually I'm gonna take that very seriously. I think there is. Like I think they feel a need to perform outrage at us. They
Hmm.
need to be seen or at least to experience themselves, even if it's not performing it for like their church people or something else for an audience. They need to experience themselves to have yelled at a queer person. It makes them feel like they're doing their religion well. Like they're doing
Yes.
Christianity, at least they're doing culture war Christianity right.
Yes.
And because no other explanation makes sense to me. I've tried having conversations like once in 20 times they'll go well. Where I just say, what are you trying to achieve with this? Like, what do you think like I used to be evangelical, like I get it. You think I need to be saved, you think I'm going to hell, and I appreciate that you want to intervene on this front. But is this the way you're going to convince me to change? Do you think this is going to work? And they usually you do get an answer if I push hard enough. Usually the because they never apologize. All right, but the justification for it usually comes down to something like, I am taught to hate your sin. I also think that you are evil for choosing your sin, and you could do the whole like this isn't something I chose, but I'm I always say I didn't choose to be queer, but my gosh, if I was given the choice, I would choose it 10 times out of 10.
That
But
probably pisses them off.
they do not like it. But but they'll say like, I don't like that you're queer, and they'll say, I'm not imagining myself actually in the place of somebody who's trying to get you to repent. I'm imagining myself in the place of a prophet whose job is to shout repent at you so that I've done
Mm,
my job. I've done my task for God of
yes.
shouting repent at you. I was sort of like, go back to me, Jonah. But you know but this seems to be kind of the role in which they are imagining themselves. Actually, I'm afraid they would get the wrong thing if they read Jonah too, but this seems to be the
Yes.
role in which they're imagining.
That is true. I think that's incredibly accurate. I think that's a really good observation, and I feel like that applies to just the whole structure itself is very performative, and
Mhm.
whether it's the worship services or the cadence and rhythm of the pastor,
Oh
or
yeah.
it's the camps and all of the stuff. It's all
Mhm.
very performative. It's all very as much as they tell us to divorce ourselves from feelings, like you can't trust your feelings, it's all very feelings driven. Um
Absolutely.
and and if I'm like you, I think it was 100%. I think it's super important to pour it out, to like highlight, point out, listen to that again, is that it is a need for them to yell repent at you.
Hmm.
Um, Rather than engaging with, say, something like, I don't know, integral to Jesus, like the Sermon on the Mount,
Right.
um, and talking about, mercy and
Mm.
or how you treat the least of these, which, by the way, if we're going to get nerdy, is literally the only place that Jesus talks about, like, okay, right and left, sheep and
Yeah.
goats. It's all based on how you treat other people. I don't see a pop quiz. I don't see a theology exam to, to become a sheep, um, but it is all performative, and because it's performative, I think it can become incredibly dangerous
Oh yeah.
because n-
Oh,
now,
it's
yeah,
yeah.
I can dehumanize you
Hmm.
because that's why you see these people saying, throwing around the word demons. They're
Yep.
demons.
Yep.
Well, now I can dehumanize you,
Yep.
and now it's that spiritual battle, right? It's that good versus evil, and you're evil, and so let's go Old Testament wrath.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think there is. Well, I'll give you my thesis on this one.
Yeah.
But my theory is that this performance is actually a manifestation of disgust. I think we talk a lot about fear as driving a lot of these things, and that is there, right? Like I do know the feeling of being like 20 something evangelical kid who realizes that there are questions you're actually technically not supposed to have asked, and maybe I've asked some of them, and now I don't know what the answers are, and I'm worried about that. But like being afraid to keep asking questions, being afraid, and we're made like there are entire media empires made to make evangelicals feel afraid. Like that is an active thing. So I'm not downplaying fear, but I actually think disgust needs to be talked about. I think they are. So disgust happens to people. We learn it. We learn to be disgusted by things that cannot be incorporated into who we are, right? Like start with food. If it's a poisonous food, if it's going to make you sick, you feel disgusted by it. You experience nausea and you vomit it out. Like it's violent and what you are taught is to have a disgust reaction to certain stimuli, and it becomes pre-rational. You violently eject it before thinking about it, and you have to save your life. On a physical level, this is actually healthy. This is a good thing. You don't want to eat
Right.
accidental poison, right? You don't want to eat a poison mushroom. But then we transfer it over to the social, and what you see happening, I think, is that you have a whole lot of Christians who cannot abide the thought and have been trained and are training one another to have a social disgust reaction to people who especially have the temerity to call themselves queer Christians or feminist Christians or even just like black liberationist Christians or
Mm-hmm.
womanist Christians, right?
Women, yeah.
Um, but because those people cannot be absorbed into their physical body, those people they can't share. Like, and by say I can't, like they will have a panic, disgust, immediate, violent ejection reaction to the thought of having those people share in Christ's body with them. Like they can't share a body with them. I still think that like First Corinthians 12 is the passage that the evangelical church just glosses over every single day and cannot seem to handle because they will not share a body with the eye. They actually are literally insisting that they're all going to be the hand or something. But yeah, I think it's discussed. It's this pre-rational thing, and so they see me on Twitter or on Instagram or wherever saying like, "Hey, I'm a queer Christian and this is awesome and I love Jesus," and that they have to say can't, mustn't be. Like they have to perform something to indicate you are not of me. You are
Hmm.
not of us. I have an us, and you are not part of it. And then they get to walk away having been cruel. And I think if you push it, they know that that was a cruel thing to say, but that protected their sense of body integrity, of their spiritual body that they understand themselves to be a part of.
It is so interesting that you say that. Have you ever listened to the podcast Straight White American Jesus?
I have. I'm a fan of it.
Okay, so Brad Onishi, and you may have heard him say this then, and his partner, I just lost his name.
Is it Dan? Yeah.
Dan, that sounds right, Dan, but I can't think of his last name. But they talked about it, I'm lucky enough to actually interview him about his Brad Onishi about his book, about this, um, straight white evangelicalism kind of
Mm.
stuff. And his partner Dan has come up with this theory where he talks about it in like it's a body identity,
Mhm.
like a national body identity,
Yeah.
and that national body looks like Captain America, right? It's
Yeah.
straight, white, blonde, blue-eyed, um, cis, manly man, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and anything that threatens that is seen as, and it's funny that you use the word vomit, and because he literally attributes it to like a virus within the body. And so
Hmm.
the body then attacks the virus to expel it so that so that it protects the whole body, right? And so he even talks about it as like this preemptive violence that can happen, and you labeled it as disgust. I think it's the exact same thing where they're seeing it as they're protecting the national body identity.
Yeah.
And any time that something threatens that, if it's female bodies, if it's bodies of color, immigrant bodies, trans bodies, then
Yeah.
they feel that internal disgust, like you said, or sickness, virus. And I can preemptively say horrible things, do horrible things because I'm doing something for the overall good.
Yep.
I'm protecting the body. So to me, when you say that, I was like, that's exactly what I mean, he wrote about it. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating that you being on the other side of the country, are
Yeah.
seeing the same things. That's incredibly interesting.
No, I'm glad. I had missed that that I had not heard that they were talking about that. I'm really glad. I've been a lot of what I've been doing. My brother and I've been doing a lot of work on this. We actually wrote a couple of papers on it, on this topic of like Christians and disgust, and how, I mean, this is a huge problem. It's also, I mean, deeply antithetical to the gospel of Christ, right? Like
Yeah.
the deep irony is that Christianity actually should be a really effective antidote to this national disgust problem, right? Because Jesus comes in and Jesus says you should go and interact with the disgusting in the full confidence that in fact you you are a virus for good. You decontaminate. My brother and I coined the phrase you contaminate. So good contamination for good. You contaminate for good with love. You contaminate, like you have the Holy Spirit, and you actually are proof against being contaminated. We're supposed to not be afraid of this. This is why, we have, or at least my theory, wacky Billy theory, but like this is why Jesus gave us practices like communion, right, and the Eucharist, where we are told to actually explicitly and intentionally indulge in a violation of the cannibalism taboo, which is one of the most fundamental disgust eliciting experiences we have. Like we have these. We
Hmm.
have these practices. We're supposed to heal the sick. Like this is one of the things that we're supposed to do is interact with people that society tells us are disgusting, and we're not supposed to be afraid of it, and yet we have done the opposite. I mean, this is the thing, is that when psychologically, I'm pulling from my brother here, but psychologically, the thing is that what is pure in the way we understand it is actually fragile, whereas what is disgusting or what is contaminating is powerful. Because if you put one drop of contaminant into a pure substance, the whole thing is contaminated. But it doesn't work the other way around, right? I can put a eyedropper of urine in a glass of water and you will not drink it. And I don't blame you, right? If I put an eyedropper of pure water into a glass of urine, you still won't drink it. It has not purified it, right? The power goes all from the contaminant to the pure. And when we get too invested in seeing the church as pure instead of seeing the church as a good contaminator of the world, then we start treating the church as fragile. We start operating out of fear, and we start justifying disgust
Mm.
reactions to people that we think are a threat to our body integrity as the church. And that's so opposite the way Jesus behaved, right? Like Jesus is God who takes on humanity, literally the divine, the pure, the perfect, taking on all of us riddled with like death and fighting and war and the miseries that we have. And Jesus
Hmm.
goes and defeats death, right?
That's really interesting. While you were saying that, um, all I could think about was like that idea of where, talking about the mustard plant, the mustard seed, which
Mm-hmm.
is a weed,
Yep.
right? And then and it's nobody planted it. As a matter of fact, it was like not, I guess not forbidden, but like, no, don't do this
Right.
because it's a weed. Nobody's going to plant this mustard seed. Nobody's going
Go
to
find
plant.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weed, and yet that's exactly the language, and
Mm-hmm.
it's literally what you're saying. It's the same language, different metaphor for
Mm-hmm.
the same truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting, Billy. I've never thought about it that way. I'm gonna have to think about that for a while.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah.
We did write some papers on it. I'll send you some links.
Yeah, do. And if you're cool with it, we'll put them in the show notes for anybody else
Oh,
that
for
might be
sure.
interested.
Oh, that'd be
Yeah, for
lovely.
sure. Um, so I guess what I'm wondering now is how has the embracing of your whole self,
Mm,
how has that informed and enlivened faith for you? How has
mm.
that made maybe not even faith, but just life?
Yeah.
How is that just well, what's it like now on the other side? You know what I mean? Like on the other
Yeah.
side of checking out and being angry and just trying to exist versus now you marriage is good and kids are
Right.
good and teaching and writing
Yeah.
papers and
We're working on a book. We're doing
yeah.
things. Yeah, no, it's absolutely. Yeah, so those are all the kind of like the circumstances, the things that like having come out and lived and living into myself have made possible for me. Um, at a just simply straightforward, just personal, my experience of life level. It was about 2 weeks after I came out to my wife that I smiled and laughed, I think, for the first time again in 8 months, 9 months. Um, it took me until I think maybe the summer until I started to cry again. Um, and then for about a year there, I couldn't cry without being like simultaneously deeply happy that I was crying because like I could like the joy of like noticing that I'm healing, right? Like I am feeling sadness and able to express it in my body. That means I'm getting better. Like that means that I'm like this is good. I'm not stuck being a robot forever, right? And I remember the first time I belly laughed was maybe 6 weeks in. It was like I can breathe, right? Like it's like
Mm,
my who I am can breathe again. So at a just personal psychological level, that on a
yeah.
spiritual level, I think there was a trajectory I was on already. Right. I like to talk a lot about liberation as what God is calling us to partner with God in doing, right? It was for freedom that Christ has set us free is one of my favorite verses now.
Mhm.
Um, and I had gotten to a place that I was stuck. I don't think, not in terms of like what I believed. And in a lot of ways, I kept learning and kept talking because that was one of the ways that I would try to distract myself. So mentally, I kept going for those 3 years that were so dark and so hard for me. Um, but spiritually, I was stuck. I mean, when I would pray, and again, I did do a lot of imaginative prayer, and I'd see myself in this room with Jesus, and we would be there and we would be together. But like the entire thing, the entire time was all about surviving, right? Like Jesus, but we'd had this conversation, and I was out to Jesus. That's a funny thing to say, but and I would just cry internally, um, and and Jesus would just hold me and remind me that He loves me, and it was on one level huge, right? Like this is people sometimes ask me how I like why I stay a Christian as a trans person, given how horrible the church is. And I understand where they're coming from. So I'm not
Mhm.
mocking that, but also like I have to laugh because like Jesus kept me alive through all of this. Like you don't like the degree to which my understanding of myself as trans is possible because I understand myself to be in Christ because Jesus is in me. There's a lovely line from Lewis, who's one of my favorite people to quote. I think it's Lewis. But yeah, no, I think this is from Till You Have Faces. It's I am in love and out of it I will not go. Right? Like
Mm,
I have seen myself be seen by Christ and this is me. This is the me that Jesus, or at least a lot closer to the me that Jesus sees. That's an amazing feeling. Like, and this is what like I don't want to come across as like I feel bad for the cis, but there is something incredibly beautiful about having the experience of this enormous shift in your life where you get to go from being less like the person God has made you to be and the person that God sees you to be and the person who God declares you to being the person that God says you are. Um, and so I spent 3 years, 3.5 years deepening my relationship with Jesus in the sense of having the love of Christ for me just reaffirmed and the presence of Christ for me in my need reaffirmed. But I couldn't go anywhere from there. Like I just didn't have the spiritual energy in the same way that I didn't have the emotional energy to move out of that space. And it's only since then that I have been able to start moving. And that's been exciting. And it's not I'm not afraid to explore. I love, exploring my faith,
Mm.
exploring the spiritual world, exploring the emotional world, finding out more about people. I can read more theologians in a way that is not threatening. I'm excited and delighted. Like, I see that my queerness is a beautiful facet of the gem of God, of humanity that God has created and indwelled. And so I'm excited to find the other facets of the gems and hear about that in ways that like just weren't opened up to me um
Mhm.
before I came out. Yeah, it's been I don't know how to like I can't stop smiling when I think about just the absolute joy of seeing myself as Christ sees me. I when I My church did a renaming ceremony for me. It was really beautiful
Mm.
about a year after I came out. And the pastor asked me what if there was a passage I wanted him to preach on, and I gave him the passage. There's a short passage in Revelation. To the one who overcomes will be given a white stone with a name on it, known only to that one and to God. Um, because he did. It's a beautiful sermon he gave about it. Um, because I wanted to try to find some way of expressing the joy of seeing that name and having it make sense,
Mm.
right? Seeing the name that you are called by God and having that actually fit who you are and feeling yourself and understanding yourself to actually be that person, right? It's that sense of a name that is that we want names to be. We want names to somehow represent the fullness of the thing that they name, of the person that they name, of what they name. And just the intense joy of being who I am made to be is, I don't know, you want to use like superlatives like all surpassing. Like I'm sure that like somewhere in the future, as I grow closer to God, there'll be some other beautiful and amazing thing, but I don't know. I can't imagine it yet.
That's well, I see the joy on your face, and to use your language, it's infectious.
Oh,
Yeah, it's infectious. And so I don't know. I just lots of thoughts going through my head. I remember, being in those, non-affirming conservative spaces, and I can think back to if I had heard that,
hmm.
thinking thinking what I would have thought. It doesn't even be we don't even need to
Sure.
waste breath
Yeah.
on it, right? And then but hearing you now and seeing the fruit, like the good fruit, right?
Hmm.
And thinking back, oh, that just makes me so sad for those that are still there. And I don't mean that in a arrogant,
Yeah.
better
No.
than way. It is a genuine and deep sadness for what I missed
Yeah.
and for those that I love that are still stuck there.
No, I understand. I About once a month or so, I think I will try to put together some kind of a message for evangelicals because I want them to know that there is more. That they
Mm,
right, like one of the things that I get struck with after enough people honestly being hateful to me online usually it's less common in real life given where I live and the rest is just how miserable that has to be. And
uh,
I'll say like it doesn't have to be this way. You it can't feel good. Like I know that some percentage of them at least have to sort of, you're ending their day and just not feel good about the way they've been that day and then think, but God wanted me to do that. Like the idea of having an obligation to God to be cruel can't feel good. And I kind of remember it feeling bad, right? Like I remember, and you would try to come up with these justifications for it, and you would say, well, that like it's because I'm fallen that I feel bad about this. But if I were like more sanctified, I would feel good about doing this thing that I think God must be telling me to do, even though I just saw like the wounding on my friend's face when I did that thing, and I felt bad about it, and they felt bad about it, and we are all very miserable about it. And you just want to say it doesn't have to be like that. Like the gospel, I'm sorry, the gospel is actually good news. Like, what if the gospel was good news? What if like God wants you to be free? And like, what if like Jesus meant it when he said that you're made for love? Like,
Yeah.
And you want them to catch it. You like, I get it. I get in evangelical fervor, right? Like I do. It's just that my evangelical fervor is to evangelicals. Like I want to save them.
Yeah. No, no, I feel that. I literally heard somebody say the other day, they were, it was online, but
Mm,
they were saying like, I would rather you be offended all the way to heaven than like me all the way to hell. And
mm,
it was that, just that thinking of like, I can remember thinking that too, of like, I don't care if you're mad at me. I don't care if I offend you. I want you to be in heaven. And just how, man, how harmful the
yeah.
way of seeing people, as if now doesn't count at all. With
Yeah.
whatever comes next, right? With whatever that might look like, as if this doesn't matter at all. And one of my favorite quotes is Richard Rohr, and he says, "God loves things by becoming them,"
Yeah.
and and matter matters. Like our bodies matter, and
So
the
much.
world matters, and creation matters, and animals matter, and
Preach.
yeah, yeah,
No, I mean, like that's the deep irony. Sorry, I think you mentioned you talked about like evangelicals often not good at remembering that the body matters. And it's so ironic, right? Because it's, pretty frequent that I get told, oh, you're some kind of like weird version of Gnostic, take a shot. I have a game, right? It's a drinking game, take a shot every time an evangelical calls me a Gnostic. But like, or queer people a Gnostic.
yeah,
Um, but like they say that we don't care about our body because trans people change them. And I keep wanting to, and I do say it, no, we care about it a lot. Like we think this matters. Like we think it matters so much that we're trying to get our bodies and our souls and our psyches and our total being into alignment. We think that that matters. You're the one who's telling me to just pretend my body doesn't matter and go
yeah,
with just, and I find it so weird. Like I mean I've been there, and so I don't find it entirely alien, but it's sad to me to have this way of thinking where you think only my rational thinking matters, and you're not willing to look at the fact that your rational thinking is just as fallen by your own theology as the rest of you. You your Calvinist scholarship is no more safe from the effects of the fall than your emotions are. And if you look at your emotions, often they're probably going to be a better directive than your Calvinist theology, if I'm going to be quite
oh
frank
my
about it.
gosh.
Right?
Almost anything is better than Calvinist
It's
theology.
bad. It's
It is
really bad. I
bad.
mean, you talk about people who try to have like, it's again, it's the deep, deep sadness of watching somebody try to like muster up
Yeah.
hatred, right? Like they
Yeah.
have to like square their shoulders to be cruel because they think they're supposed to. And it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. You become what you worship.
Mm,
You
hmm
become what you worship, regardless of what it is. You become what you
hmm
worship.
That's true.
Yeah. Billy, I want to honor your time. It's getting late. Like we're
Oh,
recording this at night. I want to honor your time, but just one final question, and
for
we're going to
sure.
land that plane. Um, I want to know what in the season that we're in, and you mentioned that you're in a blue state, so like your day to day is probably um, really good, like just
Mhm.
surroundings and stuff. But nationally, there
Oh,
is, nastiness, and we're in the state of Florida, and Florida is one of four states that at the time of this recording is now suing the federal government over Title IX because they extended that to include sexual
yeah.
orientation and gender identity. And, my state is one of four that says, no, we want to be able to discriminate.
Yeah.
What is bringing you hope right now? What brings you meaning and purpose and hope?
I'll give you a pragmatic answer and I'll give you a longer term answer. At a pragmatic answer, I think the tide is, I see hints that the tide might be starting to turn on this legislation, that this year might be the high water mark for anti-trans, anti-queer legislation, and that hatred. Yeah, I just today I saw a headline that a couple of Republicans in some conservative state, broke ranks to refuse to override a governor's veto on some anti-trans legislation,
Mm,
just saying like, my gosh, people should get to choose this. Like the government doesn't need to get involved on that one. Um, I see we have been fighting back and fighting back and fighting back as hard as we can. And it and as a way of gaining power, anti-transness hasn't gotten them very much.
Mm.
And I like to hope that anti-queerness, anti-transness is starting to wane. So I see some glimmers, some glimmers and some reasons to hope. There were an unprecedented number of anti-queer, especially anti-trans bills this year,
Yep.
following an unprecedented number of them
The year
last year.
before. Yeah.
But not as many got through, partly because I think they were more extreme than this year than last year. But still, I'm going to take it. So I think there's some just sort of pragmatic reasons as a trans person in America to be very cautiously hopeful on that front. Um, More long term, I'm hopeful because we are on the side of affirming the full imago Dei in other people. Like we are on the
Mm.
side of love, and I am told that love wins. Right? I believe it fundamentally. I believe that we serve a God who is invested in the protection, the defense, and the building up of the marginalized, of the least and the last. And I believe that in the end, God is going to have their way. So in the long term, that's I think where my hope is coming from.
Mm. I love that. I love that imagery that you just said about like we're on the side of affirming the full imago Dei in people, that full image of God, um, to use that that Christian language from the Christian tradition. I love that idea. And it's true. And I have found so much more beauty and depth there than I ever did before. That's just that I can't speak for anybody else but for myself. But
Yeah.
there's just so much richness, right?
Yeah.
Richness. That's just it's just like meaty, like thickness of whatever, of love, of yeah,
Right. You don't have
yeah,
to attenuate it. You don't have to like drain it out. It's just there and it's so much to explore. It's this ocean of just
yeah,
wild beauty.
yeah, yeah. Billy, I don't want to take up any more time. That was such a good conversation, and I'm so grateful not only to have met you and gotten to share that collective experience at that conference that we all got to be a part of, and what it means going forward. Just that,
Yeah.
that next chapter that's being written that we get to be a part of.
Excited.
But coming on here and just sharing your story and being as real and vulnerable and raw as you are, and continuing to do that on social media. uh i know I know that you are. I know that you're a voice for people that cannot do that.
Mm.
And so I know that there are people watching that maybe they don't have the capacity to put themselves out front like you do right now, because maybe they're just not on that part of their journey yet, or maybe they're just not part of their personality. But I know that that brings other people hope. So I just wanted to say, for me, thank you for all of that.
Oh, thank you so much. That's
Yeah,
encouraging.
yeah, absolutely. And I'll in the show notes, I'll put all the stuff, how people to find you,
Sure.
because I follow you on social media. And so we'll make sure if you want to connect with Billy, Billy's work, we'll have that too. We'll have links for that and all the social media, and you'll get to see what she's talking about as far as like the stuff that she does on Twitter and are you on TikTok?
I am, but I mostly just post my real stuff on TikTok. But yeah, my
Yeah.
reels will show up on TikTok too.
Yeah. Yeah, TikTok, man, they're stupid algorithms.
Oh gosh, I
Yeah,
know.
yeah, all my stuff. I just more focus on Instagram anyway. Doesn't matter. But all of that will be in the show notes, so make sure that you go down there and click on that. Thank you again so much for taking time out of your evening to spend it with us. It was a
Thank you for
beautiful
having me.
conversation. Yeah,
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
yeah,
And
it
stay
was good.
stay in contact. Yeah,
Yes, I definitely will.
yeah, I want
That
to find
was
out what's going
another awesome conversation. Just so rich and beautiful and deep. And thank you for following along, everybody. I hope that you are having a wonderful day. Now, get out of here. Go love on some people.